Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm glad you're here. I'm going to be using some XL watercolor paper from my 9x12 pad to make some cling wrap watercolor cards. So I'm just going to cut this in half at the 6-inch mark and then fold these cards in half at 4.5 inches, and they become the basis for these beautiful watercolor backgrounds. Now, you won't believe how easy these backgrounds are when you see them. The star of the show is cling wrap or glad wrap or saran wrap or plastic wrap. Wherever you are from, it's probably called something slightly different, but this technique is amazing. Now I'm going to use some of my very favourite dollar shop find masking tape to tape down my cards and create a border all the way around. Now take the tack off on your clothes or your skin first. Take a little bit of time to line up the first piece, and that will define how wide your borders are. I'm taping mine to my desktop, but you could tape these to cardboard or a thick piece of backing from your watercolour pads. So don't throw those out. They're really handy to use as backing pieces. And I'm just going to burnish the inside of both pieces with my finger so we won't get any bleeds or runs through with my paints. I'm using Daniel Smith watercolour paints, the 24 half pans. And I'm bringing in a spray bottle of water and 2 fresh water jars. And I'm going to use an Archer's round watercolour brush in size 10, but you could use any large brush for this. A wash brush would work as well. And I'm just going to start by laying down some clean water over both panels. Now this technique is really simple to do. You get different results each time. And it's something that I think anybody can try on their card fronts. I also like this technique of creating a border with your masking tape on a card that's already been folded in half. So instead of using coloured cardstock for your cards, you can create an entire card just with watercolour paper. Now I'm going to go in and choose some colours. I'm going to start off with Phthalo blue, and I'm going to test it out on a little bit of scrap paper first so I can see how much pigment is on my brush and how watery it is. I'm just choosing some nice colours that will blend for the first card in blues and a little bit of red, hoping to get a little bit of purple in there by the two colours combining. Now I'm going to use some Ultramarine Blue and Cobalt Turquoise. So I have 3 blues on this first card. And I'm going to bring in some red as well. So this is gorgeous Pyrrol Scarlet, which is a lovely colour. Just dabbing it around the card. And I'm using my spray bottle just to keep the paper damp so that the paint keeps moving. You don't want the paper saturated, but you don't want it to dry out either. And when we put the plastic wrap or the cling wrap on top of this, it needs to still be quite wet in order for the paint to move around. So that's close to done. It doesn't look like much there, but once the plastic wrap goes on, that's where the magic happens. So now I'm going to start on the other panel. This time I think I'm going to be using some yellows and blues. Try and get some nice greens happening with the colours mixing. This is Hansa Yellow Light, which is a lemon yellow. And this will work with any watercolour paints. Just giving it a bit more spray. I'm not even bothering to clean my water jar there because it doesn't really matter. As long as you are not over mixing the colours on the paper, you'll be fine. So there's some Ultramarine Blue. And now I'm bringing in some of that lovely turquoise colour, which is Cobalt turquoise. It's almost a viridian colour. It's lovely. Doesn't look like much, but I can assure you this is going to look gorgeous once the plastic wrap comes off. Now, this step is not essential, but I am going to take a tissue and wipe the excess paint off the tape. This is just to ensure that I don't get any paint bleeding underneath. You don't have to do this step, but I just wanted to ensure that I had nice clean borders. And it's just simply a matter of putting on the plastic wrap and having a bit more play. So for the first one, I'm just going to use my fingers to smush the plastic wrap around, create little patterns where I can. And the only thing you really need to watch out is that you don't have any air bubbles underneath that will pick up your paint. You need to make sure that all that plastic sits on your card. So the second one's coming in. Same thing again. This time I think I'll try moving it in a slightly different method. I'm going to just lay it down and wiggle my finger this time and just have a little bit of a wiggle going up and down, seeing if I can get a somewhat different design this time. But it is up to chance what you get. Really can't go wrong. Make sure there are no air bubbles. And I think that's done. Now, the most difficult part of this entire process is putting away your Glad wrap or cling wrap and leaving it overnight or for several hours. So I left mine overnight, and here's the reveal. Wow, I'm really happy with how these came out. Now, they're a little bit buckled because there was so much water on these. So I'm going to bring my heat tool in and that will flatten them out. But this will do one of two things. First of all, it will flatten out your cards, but it will also allow that tape to come right off. You can see how I'm chasing the tape with my heat gun, and it is not tearing at all. It just makes it so easy to remove that masking tape. This is QZ tape from the dollar store. And as you can tell, I love this tape. I have about 6 or 7 rolls of it by now. Now, there's a little bit of buckling still. Don't worry about that. I'm just opening the card and heating the back of the card to help it lie flat. Look at that design. How pretty is it? Just gorgeous. Same again with the second one, using your heat tool to remove that frame around the outside. And now I'm bringing in a Chux magic eraser and a little bowl of water, and I'm just gently dabbing at any areas where the paint seeped under the tape. With the red, it seemed to seep under a little bit more than the blue, just at a couple of the corners. It's nothing major, but these Chux magic erasers are brilliant. So this is the basis for the card. You can see how they're both quite different. Now I'm going to enhance the red and blue card with some Prismacolor pencils. Any watercolour pencils or coloured pencils would work for this. So what I'm doing is just gently shading, and I'm just being very gentle around the edge in places where I think it could need a little bit more enhancement. I'm not going over the white lines there because they are what are creating the pattern. I'm actually going on either side of the lines. And it's subtle. You don't need to do this step, but I just decided I wanted to give it a try and have a bit more playtime. So now I'm bringing in all my blues and adding some more blue around there, just in places. I'm only going to do this to the card on the left. The card on the right, I think, stands alone as it is. But the one on the left, I just wanted to see what would happen. And I really like this effect. I'm not being too careful with it. All I'm really doing is turning my card over and over to find places where there are some places that could do with some blue. That's all it is. Bringing in more of a cobalt shade now. The first one was more the ultramarine shade. This is more like a cobalt shade, just to match the colours that I've used with my paint. And this is fun. It's a real play session. Now, there are a couple of different ways you could finish these cards off. One of the ways I thought I might do these cards was to put a very large greeting on the outside and just stamp it down with some black ink. That would be a way to finish the card. You could even put a small greeting on it and that would work as well. But what I decided to do ultimately was to bring in some die cuts, and I'm going to use the same Canson XL paper to create my die cuts so that they will match the border around the outside perfectly. This is Lily by Kaisercraft, and I've used this before in a technique on one of my videos called 10 New and Creative Ways to Use Die Cuts. If you haven't seen that video, it goes through a lot of different ways you can use your die cuts. This was a piece I made in that video using the lily. You can see it there in the top right hand corner. And I used the Tim Holtz Wildflower Stems 2 with the other die cuts I used. So if you want to have a look at that, please go ahead and look at that after you've come to the end of this video. It has lots of die cutting tips and techniques for you. This thank you is from a company called cardmakingmagicdesigns.co.uk, and it's called Thank You Die Set. So I'm putting that onto the Canson XL watercolor paper. And what you may find when you run this through your die cutting machine is that it doesn't cut all the way through. So before you try and remove it, just do something as simple as adding a shim. I'm just going to cut it again, and it's a very thin piece of plastic I've added to the top of this as a shim, and it cuts through perfectly now. And that's a tip for you when you're die cutting. Always check the back to see if it has cut through before you start pulling the pieces out. Look how pretty that die cut is of the lily. And the thank you is very fine, which I really like too. And because they are exactly the same paper as the cards themselves, coordination is really simple. Now, I could do them that way, but I actually like having that blue in the centre of the lily and the thank you just on the top there. Now I'm going to adhere the die cuts with fine tip glue by Stampinup. A really simple way to adhere these would be to use the double-sided paper when you run them through the Big Shot, and then you don't have to fiddle with glue. But I don't mind putting a little bit of effort into gluing them on. I'm just going to set that aside under a large block to weight down that die cut. And see how that blue kind of really pops in the centre of the lily there. So I'll now put that under the block to weigh that down. Now the other one's dry. And here's a tip for the fine tip glue. You just need to thread that needle into the tip and you'll have that glue for a very long time before it dries out. Now I keep some bling in these little folders, and I don't use these much these days, but I decided I would like to try them on this project. So I've pulled some pieces of sequins and glimmer that might look good with either the green card or the red card, and I decided to go with this silver on the thank you card, and I'm only going to use 3 rhinestones, and they're sort of rainbow rhinestones. They have really fun colours in them. I got them from a dollar store. But just 3 little pieces of bling is all this card needs. The background is so gorgeous on its own. Then for the lily, I decided these shimmery green rhinestones look fine, and they're sort of more a rounder shape. I started by putting the light coloured ones on, and I put 3 of those on, and then I thought, you know what, they're just disappearing into the background. I think I'm going to change them up for the darker colours. So I changed them. I took those 2 light colours off and replaced them with the darker colours, and I was much happier with that. They were popping out of the background a little bit more rather than just disappearing. And I love how these 2 cards turned out. I'm really happy with them. You can see that little bit of bling on both of them just shows up nicely. So if you've never tried using cling wrap with your watercolours, this is a technique that is fun to try, and it's experimental. You'll get something different each time. I'm adding in some nice coloured envelopes from my 26 coloured envelopes that I bought from Officeworks. And there are the cards finished. I hope you enjoyed this video today. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already, and click that like button if you enjoyed what you saw today. It really helps more than you know, guys. Leave a comment if you want. I would love to hear from you as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.